Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another exciting virtual tour with Pretty Gritty Tours. I'm your host, as I almost always am, Chris Staudinger. And I say almost always because I'm hoping that someday we get Paul to come back and be a guide for a little while. So you guys should send him messages of love and adoration, and hopefully he'll come on board with the whole thing. Is everything working tonight? Whoo! All right. So let's do our housekeeping stuff. First of all, is the image clear? And secondly, is the audio okay? Let me know in the comments. And, that is a good question that I should know the answer to. I know it's a famous classical piece, and I can get you the answer to that later, but I don't have it right now. So we'll go from there. But yeah, welcome to the virtual tour of the Pantages. I'm really excited for this one tonight. I feel like the Pantages story is one that sticks in my mind all the time. It's one of the first ones that I encountered when I started being a guide in Tacoma, and it's a haunting ball of yarn where every time I tug on that thread, something more unravels on this whole thing. And so I'm just excited to at least experience it tonight with you guys, and hopefully we get to see what's happening. So yeah, it looks like it's good for almost everyone. We do have a little bit of feedback for one person. I'm hoping that that's just an issue with their connection. So if it sounds like things are repeating, you can pause it really briefly and then it should catch up, is my hope and ambition. But keep me posted tonight. I'm going to do my best to operate as both your tour guide and your technical expert tonight. A job that is always as daunting as it sounds, actually. Well, are you guys feeling ready? Shall we explore the Pantages? Let's. So the Pantages Theater is the oldest operating Pantages in the country. And right downtown in Tacoma, here's the beautiful city of Tacoma. If you head like right down in the heart of it, pretty much almost where it says Tacoma on the map, that's how you know that it's super prominent down there. The Pantages Theater is in the heart of our historic theater district. It is in the heart of downtown, and it occupies this block right down here next to the Bostwick Flatiron Building and what is currently the Winthrop Apartments, but used to be the Winthrop Luxury Hotel. And it's just a couple blocks from the main downtown corridor, Old City Hall, the North Pacific Building. It's central, and it is much beloved. But where does it all begin? I'm glad you asked. If you're walking downtown and you notice this stunningly white terracotta and plaster building reaching out into the heart, it's difficult to miss, and it is haunted in every sense of the word by this gentleman right here, Alexander Pantages, the man himself, whose name is in glowing incandescent bulbs on the exterior of the building. And that hasn't always been the case. While it is the oldest Pantages theater of the 30 predominant ones that used to exist in the country, it is not the first one to have been built, and it has not always been called the Pantages. So already ripe with intrigue. When it was first constructed, it would have looked more like this, which if you're looking at the building today, let's see if I can take you guys down onto the street view really quick. Isn't that different at all from what it looks like right now? Some minor changes have been made, but it is a true historically preserved structure, and we're lucky to have it downtown. And if you can see, this is taken from, I believe, 1921. This one here with the Pantages glowing sign, the Bostwick, and the Winthrop right across the way. And ta-da! It remains very much unchanged. And so we're very, very lucky, not just for the tour tonight, but as the city of Tacoma, to have this cool snapshot into the past. When it was originally built, it was designed to have a capacity of 1,186 patrons. And this cool addition on the exterior here is a 7-story office building that was built into the design of the theater itself. And those are both key parts of everything tonight. So I guess if you guys are feeling confident in this, we can. I have to see if Aries is around. Anytime ghost stuff happens, Aries finds a way to involve himself in our tours. I'd like to thank our actual sponsor. We'll do this the right way too. Tonight's tour has been brought to you in part by the generous contributions of the National Alliance of Preservation Communities. They were going to have their 2020 forum in Tacoma this year, and it didn't happen the way that they were expecting. Shocker. Thanks, COVID. But they managed to do the entire thing virtually. And for the parts I've been involved in, it seems like everything has gone really well. I've heard only good things about everyone else's presentations and contributions to the conference. So I hope that they really enjoyed themselves. But they first approached me about doing a virtual tour for the Pantages, and that spun off into this tour that we get to do for you guys tonight. So thank them. Also, thank our generous booze sponsor tonight, Ouzo, the traditional Greek liquor that turns cloudy when mixed with water. I don't know how many of you drink Ouzo on the regular, but it starts as an ultra clear liquor like this bad boy right here. Get it closer to my face. And then once you mix it with water, it turns a milky white. See, we've already learned stuff. And don't worry, it is a wee little glass, but there's more than one tonight. It's as if you guys know me somehow. Shall we jump back in? So the Pantages Theater has gone through some very significant changes as a building. It was opened for the first time in 1918. It was transferred to the RKO Vaudeville Theater and Picture House in 1929, became the Roxy Theater in 1932, was historically restored and refurbished in 1983, and then opened again at that time as Pantages again. But it all begins with Alexander Pantages. And let me tell you guys, this dude, he no one knows what his actual birth year is because he was approximately 9 years old. We think he's not even sure. He was approximately 9 when he was on a business trip with his father in Cairo, and he jumped ship. He left his dad at 9 years old, boarded a ship as a stowaway, found himself in South America, where his first real job was digging the Panama Canal. He found himself growing through his teen years into adulthood, working random jobs up through Central America into the Americas. where he was in the United States. And then in California, he began to work in earnest as a bartender, a janitor, a brief stint as a professional boxer, and then eventually finding himself not good at any particular thing other than starting businesses. He found himself moving northwards along with all entrepreneurial young men at the time to the Yukon gold rush. And as fate would have it, he didn't have enough money for insulated clothing. So on the journey, he essentially wrapped his ankles with newspapers from San Francisco. When he set foot in the Yukon for the first time, a miner noticed the newspaper and, so starved for news, offered to pay him $5 for it. And this is quintessential Alexander. He refused the offer of $5. When another miner came up and offered him $10, he turned that one down as well. And by the time a third miner came up and tried to outbid the other two with an offer of $20, Alexander finally agreed to read the newspaper aloud that night at a local saloon and charge 50 cents a ticket to do it. And the record is that he brought in just over $350 reading the news aloud at a local saloon, charging 50 cents a head. This is the man who started a theater empire in the Pacific Northwest. And man, this is the beginning and the end for him. That attitude, I think. But it would be unfair of me to talk about the Pantages without giving full and almost total credit to Kate Rockwell, better known as Klondike Kate. And she was equally as incredible, if not more so, in my personal opinion. Kate here starts her job as, I don't even know, we're going to call her a pioneer in every sense of the word. Her family is originally in New Jersey, but they end up moving west, where she grows up in actually my hometown of Spokane, Washington. And by all early accounts of her, she used to just get bored doing girl stuff. So she would go incognito as a boy and go raise hell around the city of Spokane. Any opportunity she had to essentially break the rules, she was all about it. And the thing about Kate is she grew up in a rich family, but she wanted her own money. So she also tried to start businesses, but every time she tried, she got smacked down because, you guessed it, she was a woman. Until eventually she found herself headed to the Yukon. And the Royal Mounted Police turned her back. They're like, no, ma'am, this town's going to be too rough for you. So she dresses as a boy, gets into town, and starts her own saloon, where then she starts dressing as a woman again because she opens up a vaudeville act, a burlesque act, and runs the house as the madame as well. So she's running girls, she's running whiskey, she's running entertainment, and eventually drugs. And this is how she makes millions of dollars in the late 1800s. And in case you haven't guessed by the glint in my eyes and the ouzo in my hand, she is a personal hero. So here's to you, Klondike Kate. But this is the tragic beginning of our story, I'm going to say. And to keep you on the hook, I'm going to give you guys a quick look at the Pantages itself right now, because I want you to experience the building visually before I take you through it historically, because there's so much to offer about this. So this is the building as it is today. This footage was taken, I think, 2 weeks ago when I was going through getting everything ready for the tour tonight. And what's so extraordinary about this is, aside from the colors, this is historically accurate. This is the same plaster, the same molding, the same Tiffany stained glass skylight up there at the top. Only a few adjustments have been made. And like I said, one of them is the color scheme. When they refurbished this in 1983, they went through layers upon layers of paint and found each of these colors at some point in the history of the building, but they decided to make it a unified approach. And so they took each color that they could find from the stained glass window, the Tiffany's one up top, and then created a unified palette down there. So when you're in the Pantages today, it all matches that original 1918 stained glass skylight up there, but that wasn't the original sort of color design to the whole thing. It was a phenomenal addition that they made, and I fully endorse the fact that they did it. So that's what the Pantages looks like, and it has modest beginnings because it all starts with Klondike Kate, I think. When Alexander first arrived to the Klondike, one of the first places he becomes a patron at is the establishment that Kate here runs. And it really depends on which account you read as to whether or not they were attracted to each other because of the business potential or because they had a physical chemistry. I'm going to say that it was a physical chemistry. And here's the two things I'm basing it on. Number one, if you go through the letters of these two individuals and you just look through the timeline, Kate was well and truly in love with Alexander. I firmly believe that. As far as Alexander, you don't see the same romantic streak in him in his writing necessarily, mostly because he was illiterate. And so any records that he has are actually ledgers. But if you look at the women in his life, it's like if you put a timeline of them together, it's like looking at a carbon copy of Kate. And I really think that she was the first woman to have a true impact on his life. Regardless of their intentions and their feelings, the things that we know for sure is that they went into business together and they opened their first theater, the Orpheum, up in the Yukon. And it was a vaudeville act. And Alexander was a master at finding talent. He could bring in people, he could groom them and train them and make them a presentable act and charge a ton of money for it. And Kate was a maestro at making money. So between the two of them and the alcohol and the drugs and the girls and the acts, they were making a lot of money through conning gold miners out of their cash, through providing entertainment and adding a light through the long, dark winters of the Yukon. And their relationship is the stuff of legend, so much so that, in fact, in 1943, starring Ann Savage and Tom Neal, Hollywood put together I'm going to call it rose-tinted version of their relationship. I've seen parts of it, not the entirety of the film, but it presents the story of Klondike Kate and Alexander Pantages in certainly the lens of 1943. One point that I think is worth talking about is Alexander Pantages earns the nickname the Christopher Columbus of new talent. And I think of all the nicknames that he has, including the one that he gives himself, King Greek, this is the one that is most representative of who he is as a person across the whole spectrum. Like, you're looking at Christopher Columbus as a historic figure. Alexander Pantages certainly lives up to that criteria, in my personal opinion. Ooh, foreshadowing. And let's talk about Lois Mendenhall, because as the theater empire is starting to expand, Alexander and Kate Rockwell sign an agreement that they're going to get married as soon as they reach this point in their relationship where the money is good and the business is expanded where they want it to. So Kate goes down to Vancouver, Canada, and opens up a new theater. Alexander goes down to Seattle and opens the first of what would be the Pantages circuit, first called the Crystal Theater in Seattle. And I believe that's in 1903, and then gets ready to open up the Tacoma Pantages in 1918. And he bankrolls the entire thing almost exclusively with money borrowed straight from Kate, Klondike Kate, also from money that he takes from their first theater, the Orpheum, which is predominantly in Rockwell's name, believe it or not. And as he's doing this, Klondike Kate's getting ready to go down and visit him and inspect the new theater and celebrate their reunion. And when she comes down to Seattle, she receives a letter from someone who works for Alexander. And it says, "Dear Kate, thank you so much for your contributions to this time. I'm very excited for you to get to see this new theater. By the way, I've been married for days now, and I have no intention of ever seeing you again." And that move is more ice cold than this ouzo and all of the Yukon put together. And I want you to bookmark that in your mind, because as we move forward in the story of Pantages, there's going to be a lot of nebulousness, a lot of unanswered questions, and you're going to have to answer them for yourself. And I want you to have the historic context to do it. So here we are. Lois Mendenhall is the woman that Alexander marries. She's a talented violinist in the Seattle area, and they find love together and end up wed. And this begins so much of the relationship. I think this is a good transition point to talk about Worthy Morris, because I imagine, if you can see Worthy Morris here, he's the gentleman who's underneath the front tire of this automobile loaded with dudes. And I think that's kind of how Kate's heart probably felt when she received the letter from Pantages. It's also the first really big act that Pantages brought into his vaudeville act when he opened it with his former paramour's money in Tacoma. And Worthy Morris is pretty representative of vaudeville. Like, if you wanted to go to a show and you didn't want to see something like King Lear, you didn't want to have your heart broken, you just wanted light TLC, My 600-Pound Life entertainment, you wanted something to just binge watch, vaudeville was where it was at. And Alexander was a master at finding guys like Worthy Morris here, whose whole act, mind you, was betting money that he wouldn't be crushed by a car as it drove over him. And he had a illustrious career doing this. So this is a good example of him here in Tacoma, not in 1909. That's when he really began. And he would load these cars up with guys. The more people, the better. And they would drive over him and he would survive, and then he would make a bunch of money off of it. He ends up concluding his career when he is crushed to death under a car. I hope that that wasn't a surprise ending for anyone. If all of you are thinking about starting a TikTok account where a car runs over you, you will die. Don't do it. It's a dumb idea. People these days. The rest of the vaudeville acts start in January 7th, 1918, when the Pantages really opens up and becomes, oh man, the most prominent B-class theater in Tacoma. I don't want to call it that. It was a beautiful building. It was the most beautiful of the theaters in the area. And it really was bringing in the most money, but it was vaudeville, you know? It wasn't these glorious acts of New York coming out to tour in Tacoma. It was fun entertainment. It was bawdy, it was raunchy, and people were into it. And that was signature Pantages. Here's a beautiful picture of the opening glory days of the Pantages and just people lining up. And one of the things that made it so great was it was right off of the cable car line going up 9th Street, right in front of it. So people going to and from work, back down to Tacoma or back out of Tacoma based on where you lived, would show up here and they would spend 5 cents. They would go in, see a show or a series of shows. And it was always good stuff, because the secret to the Pantages secret herbs and spices was the circuit. Now, if you remember, I was talking about the fact that Pantages had 30 of these Pantages theaters at its heyday, and he would hire an act and they would start at one of the Pantageses, like maybe up in Seattle, maybe out in Spokane, wherever, and they would do the whole loop. So at one point, one act would go to each of the 30 Pantages theaters, and that was the circuit. And it was the first kind of like really successful experiment in doing this. Circuit theater wasn't something that was really popular at the time, and Alexander truly and literally put it on the map. And Tacoma was the most beautiful stop. While Seattle was his first Pantages theater, it wasn't the nicest. And while I think the ones down in California are the more famous, Tacoma always was the most grand and continues to be the oldest of them still existing in the world today. So good job, us. And when you look at it, like, just think about how much money they had to spend on halogen bulbs. Like, they were rocking it on that electric bill. When you look at it today, granted, this picture that you're looking at right now is during a remodel that happened 5 years ago, I think, 4 or 5 years ago. So they're changing out the windows right here. So they aren't those tiny little cubby holes that you see. They're going to be like the ones in the top left up there. But the building is still exquisite, very much the way that it was intended to be. And to give you a taste of like the kind of talent that was coming through, Charlie Chaplin stepped on stage here. Franklin Delano Roosevelt gave an address on the speech in the Pantages. Babe Ruth actually went on stage at one point and just slightly knocked softballs out into the audience, autographed, and people lost their ever-loving mind. Like, this was the spot. It was where you would go to get your information, to have your fun, to get your laughs. And then Fanny Brice, for those of you who know, famous comedian, also was on stage. Like, I could go on and on about the people that were on the Pantages, but I won't bore you with it. I want to take you into the building really quick so that you get to experience it in its full glory before we go farther on the Pantages story. So these are original blueprints, well, Xeroxes of the original blueprints, which, as you may have guessed, were blue. And to quickly address this one, it would have been right downtown, sort of in the district that the Moore Theater is in today, but it was destroyed in the 1960s. I don't want to smash Seattle right now, but for those of you who have been on any of my tours, you know that the hot competition between Tacoma and Seattle is still fierce. And a lot of the historic structures that were so glorious in Seattle, they ended up destroying in the name of progress. Shameful. The Tacoma one is still downtown where it's always been, so no big deal. I'll try not to. I love Seattle, just not as much as Tacoma. When you're looking at these blueprints, one thing that I think is really exciting to see is the slope. So a lot of you already know that Tacoma was terraced, like you had to put it up the hill. And the Pantages is a beautiful example of how they built it into the hillside. So the right hand, that tower of apartment buildings or businesses there, is on the uphill portion. And then the businesses that extend into the subterranean section, you can see that actually as a part of the sidewalk there. And a key feature that I really want you to notice are these stairs here. So it wasn't always a gradual slope. They built a very steep staircase into the side there so that you could access all of those exterior businesses right there. When you're looking at a cross section of the blueprints here, you can see the interior of the theater, all of that really beautiful plasterwork on the inside. The stage is represented there on the right. And then you can see that there were businesses and storage facilities built into 2 subterranean levels down through the theater there. This is an example of the exterior on the business portion with the main lobby. So this would be on the westernmost portion looking eastward right there. And then as an example of 2 things here, one, this is original brickwork. Our Scottish-born master architect who designed this building for Alexander wanted to have this brickwork installed there to reinforce it, but to give that sort of beauty to the exterior there. But the lower level here was always designed to be retail space because Alexander, as a thinker, was like, no, as much money as we could make off of this, let's do it. And so the architect was like, great, let's put retail space at the bottom. So I believe this is from the 1960s when Santos Italian American Foods was down there. And this is the eastern portion of the Pantages, which I can take you to briefly because it's virtual. I'm not bound by the laws of physics. Here you go. So you can see, hasn't changed much. This is all part of the Pantages structure now. They don't have to lease this out to anyone, but you can flip back and forth here and it's like, wow, this is pretty much the same as it always was. So I love this shot too, because you can see those storefronts that extend downwards on the bottom left-hand corner of this photo. And that's part of the mystery and the intrigue of this building. So when you're looking at it as the Roxy, you can see that it started to get sealed up and they actually capped that sidewalk section down there so you couldn't access the exterior entryways to the underground businesses. But the Paradise here, which by the way was just genius because it was a candy shop, floral shop on the exterior of the Pantages. So if you were going to see the show or something, or you're going with your sweetheart, you could get candy, you could get flowers, you could eat in the theater. Genius. Someone was really thinking on this one. But this building, you can see some remnants of inside. So this door is inside a subterranean prop room inside the Pantages today, but it would have been part of those exterior facing businesses that are now sealed up underground. And when you're down there, this is a subterranean, super creepy, 100% haunted men's restroom that's down there. And I want to take you guys to the video of this. So you can go into the Pantages. You can go inside the prop room if you're invited, and you can see this secret room. So this is the utility staircase that leads out of the sub-basement, which, don't worry, I'll show you guys here in a second. And it goes up into prop storage, which is now all underground, but used to have exterior doors. And when we get up in the prop room here in a second, you can see that those exterior doors essentially just got bricked over. But all of that original white terracotta is still visible, but now it's on the interior of the building. So this is all an addition where they removed the facades of stores. And the only place you can still see it is inside the prop room here. So this private entrance to the business, and yes, they do event rentals at the Pantages in case anyone wants to get married there, is adjoining to this thoroughly tobacco-stained terracotta that used to be the exterior of the building. Get excited. So while this used to be an exterior door, it's now sealed up by some unknown force. The people that I've worked with that have worked at the Pantages have no idea what's blocking it. Nobody has gotten into it. Don't worry, I'm working on it. But just to the right here, you can enter into what would have been a subterranean public restroom. And this was very common at the time because so much of Tacoma was lattice work underground down there. Oh, what a tease I am. They would just put these subterranean public restrooms down there so that you could essentially go across the sidewalk level as it dipped underground and go into a restroom. I'm going to show you guys the photography of this really quick so that you get a sense for what's down there. So this is the underground restroom with a 360 camera. It is from the 1930s. I think it was the last time anyone officially took a leak down here. And this one I love because you can see that staircase from the earlier blueprint as it extended up to the main sidewalk level, but they just capped it in the 1960s, I think was the first time that they put a base layer on the top of that. Everything just kind of got left down there and sealed up. So you see all that original terracotta here on the left. All of the original fixtures are still down there, including this 1960s Pepsi Cola can, which I'm no soda, I don't know, forensic scientist, but I would estimate that this has been underground for approximately a long time. You can see that aggressive slope though as you go past the Rialto and Urban Grace. Both of these are just west up the hill from the Pantages Theater. So if we go back to the street level here, all the way across to the donuts here. This is the Pantages. This is where the Great Tacoma Theater used to be. It is now a subway. And then just up the hill is the Rialto and Urban Grace, which counts in our theater book. Even though it is a church, they designed it to be a civic community space. So it has a wide variety of leasable space, a theater in the middle of it, and a lot going on. This doesn't shock me, Reed. You're a man about town. So let me take you quickly back here as we go up. Just another exterior view of the Pantages so you can kind of see the fact that it's been given some TLC over the last years. Now, where did things go wrong? I hope is what you're asking yourselves right now. If it's not, if what you're asking is, are the old business spaces buried under the sloping sidewalk? Yes and no. When the Pantages got refurbished in 1983, they removed all that business space and turned it into a consolidated space for the theater. And they did that because it was the first time that it was city-owned. So they got rid of that leasable space, turned it into a full city property, and ran it with that. Now, the Pantages was going gangbusters. Acts that were dominating the headlines were running the show, and Alexander owned an empire. He had everything west of the Mississippi as far as vaudeville and video circuits. And what's so clever about the design of the Pantages is that they were always built not just to be live action vaudeville theaters, but to also operate as movie theaters. Each of them, when they were originally constructed, had a projector room and film storage in them, so that if film ever became more popular, spoiler alert, it did, they could transition to that. And so the Pantages was originally set up to be both a movie house as well as a live action vaudeville theater, just kind of chasing the trend. And Alexander's main competition was actually the Kennedy family. Oh my gosh, Joseph Kennedy, the patriarch of the Kennedy dynasty, owned a series of vaudeville theaters east of the Mississippi. And both of them were expanding so aggressively that the Mississippi became the dividing point, and Kennedy never really breached farther westward, and Alexander could never cross the river into the east because they kept sabotaging each other. And this, as you may have guessed, is where things began to change. So the first thing that kicked off the downfall of Alexander Pantages was a young man by the name of Samuel Moore, who was drafted. Well, actually, no, he volunteered to be part of World War I. He was a proud American, and he wanted to go to the movie or the vaudeville show at the Pantages Theater, depicted here. This is the one in Spokane, with his sweetheart at the time. And they went in and were immediately ejected from the theater because that was the policy of Alexander Pantages, that no young man or woman who was Black could enter and see a show. Samuel Moore was unique, though, in that he was the first person to say, nope, absolutely not. And he ends up going and taking a lawsuit against Alexander Pantages, which causes him to change the official policy of the Pantages theaters. And now African Americans were allowed into the Pantages circuit, but it was a foothold for controversy. And it really started to bloom with the trial of Alexander in 1929. It's gonna get worse. And which is why, thank you for asking, Teresa, I'm drinking ouzo. Not really in honor of Alexander, but in memory of the Greek heritage that brings us the Pantages, which in and of itself, I'm already showing my hand on this whole thing, is a difficult thing to do. Because remember, the Pantages circuit in its infancy was bankrolled by Kate Rockwell, designed by a Scottish immigrant, and only given the name of the entrepreneurial Greek Alexander Pantages, whose actual name was Pericles, by the way, but he ran away. Anyhow, I'm getting ahead of myself here. The trial of Alexander is simply the most dramatic thing that happens in his life, and that's saying something for a guy who runs a series of just over 30 theaters. He is accused in the early part of 1929 of raping 17-year-old Eunice Pringle, pictured here on the right. She was a showgirl and dancer who came in for an audition, and according to her end of the story, asked for an opportunity to be on stage. Alexander was like, absolutely, let's see what you've got. Let's go into my private office here. And then in they went, and he unfortunately raped her. Now, she comes forward with these allegations, and the whole thing goes to trial. And Alexander is found guilty and convicted to 50 years to serve out. But he never does. While in prison, he hires new lawyers, and they come forward, and they're like, we want a retrial. And here's why. The moral character of Eunice Pringle was never on display in the first trial. And that's wrong. And we'd like to see that changed. Here we go, guys. So the judge grants a retrial and it goes to court. And they say that because Eunice Pringle was a loose woman, a professional dancer, and willing to do anything, that she couldn't have actually been raped. And then they go to, and this is a key point for me, the broom closet where the act supposedly happened, allegedly happened. And they say, well, this space is too small for this to have happened. So this can't have happened. But for me, for so many reasons, looking back, why were they in a broom closet in the first place? Needless to say, this has been a hotly contested thing throughout history. And yes, it's nasty. So here's the worst part. When it goes to retrial, the new jury acquits Alexander Pantages. And they're like, you know what? We're very, very sorry that this happened to you. And he gets off. My favorite thing about this whole thing, sadly, is a Eunice Pringle quote in which she says, it seems, this is what they interview her on the steps of the courthouse after Alexander is acquitted the second time. She says, it seems that anyone who puts up a fight for justice is doomed for failure. This verdict shows that clearly the value that at least 12 persons in the state of California put upon a girl's honor. Now that it is over, I will be able to return once more to the life of an ordinary American girl, and that makes me very happy. You know, they say, in God we trust, but it's written on $1. Spit and fire, young, 18-year-old now, Eunice Pringle, fighting for American justice. The saddest part of this whole thing is that afterwards, the first thing that happens is, and this isn't sad, Alexander Pantages is ruined financially by the whole thing. The scandal sticks with him for the rest of his life, which, spoiler alert, is only 5 years after this event. And he is forced to sell all of his theaters at a huge discount. Notably, the financial crisis of 1929 has just happened at the same time, but he ejects all of his properties to the Kennedys, who turn it almost immediately into an RKO, and the Kennedy family now has a monopoly on the vaudeville circuit coast to coast. But the conspiracy theories start almost instantly that the Kennedy family paid off Pringle to fake that this event happened to her. It's very widely believed at this point that that is not at all a possibility. But sadly, a book was written in I think the 1960s, essentially confirming that she was murdered by cyanide in 1933, and that her final deathbed confession was that she took a bribe against Alexander Pantages. But I want to break this down for you guys. Number one, if someone is going to be poisoned by cyanide, which suffocates you, by the way, I don't think the first thing you're going to be is like, oh yeah, $10,000 is what I was paid to get out of town. Secondly, and most importantly, she didn't die in the 1930s. She actually died much, much later on in life and spent a long career not being a terrible person and maintained the story that she originally had all throughout. Boom. Important stuff. Here's the thing, though. When he lost all of his money and Alexander sold it and the conspiracy theories started to go on and on about him, the part of that story that sticks out to me the most, that I love to tell, is that Kate Rockwell, who you may know as an entrepreneurial spirit, who was already on her second divorce by the time she met Alexander. And I gotta say, I think she genuinely loved this guy. Despite the really wicked stuff that he did to her, including not marrying her when he promised to, marrying someone else, telling her via essentially early 1900s text, and then also keeping the millions of dollars that he absconded with to start an entire enterprise that he never gave her any credit for. But Kate's brought up as a character witness for his trial because she's one of the people that's known him the longest. Alexander and his lawyers for the second trial are like, Kate, will you come up and testify to the quality of this man's character? And she's like, yeah, I'll do it. She shows up, rolls up into the courtroom, and like a hush falls over everyone. And they're like, oh man, that's Klondike Kate. What is she going to say? She looks at Alexander as he's waiting there in the defendant's booth. And she says, not a damn thing. She turns around, walks out of the courtroom, and never testifies. What a badass. So Kate is where we pick up the story because, again, Alexander dies 5 years after this whole event. The Pantages gets rebranded as the Orpheum, which blows my mind for so many reasons because Kennedy, instead of naming it anything else or keeping it the Pantages, just turns it into the RKO Orpheum, which is the original name, you may recall, of Alexander's first theater up in the Yukon. Or, if we're being historically accurate, Kate's first theater up in the Yukon. It continues as the Orpheum for quite a period of time, like a flash in the pan, I guess, until it's eventually sold in the late 1930s to become the Roxy Theater. And that's what it operates as well through the 70s. But Will Rogers was one of the headliners for the RKO. They were doing some good stuff. Just more historic photos of people driving cool cars and wearing sweet coats and hats. It operates as the Roxy for the longest period of time. More than anything else that this building has been, it has been the Pantages Center Roxy Theater. And I just love this photo. This is, I think, the most familiar memory that people in Tacoma are going to have with this building, of it being a family theater, showing the coolest flicks in town. And they don't do much with the interior during that period. The thing that goes through the greatest change is the building itself, but not until the 1980s. So a brief note on Klondike Kate. While this whole trial has been put to bed with Klondike Kate, she ends up in Bend, Oregon, where she follows a land ownership claim. And most women at that time would have ended up out there, like the government was like, here, settle the American West. You just have to work the land for 5 years. And so a guy would go out, they'd work the land, a woman would marry into it. Hey, presto, you're now a landowner. Klondike Kate got one of these grants from the government and was like, I'm gonna work it my damn self. And so she worked the claim for 5 years, had her plot of land out there, and then ends up living and dying in Oregon. And she is famous in the Bend area, though not as famous as she was in the Yukon, for so many reasons. Number one, she was a major booster for the area. If someone was like, we need money for a project, she would kick in the front door and essentially persuade people to give them money. During the Great Depression of the 1930s, she single-handedly prepared gallons of soup for hobos in the area, and then continued her entertainment circle until she eventually died in 1957 on, I believe, her fifth husband. And her dying wish was that she would be cremated and that her ashes would be spread on the high desert of Oregon, which is something that years after she died never came to pass. Her ashes were interned at a local mausoleum. Her husband died not long after that, and nobody took up the cause until much later in the story, when a mysterious figure, someone with a deep devotion to Klondike Kate, showed up at the mausoleum, claimed her ashes, took them up to the Highland Desert, and spread them. Who was it, you may ask? I'm not going to tell you yet. 1983 rolls around, and the building is refurbished. They restore it to its historical grandeur because local politicians in the Tacoma area, as they are wont to do, were like, you know what? Tacoma's rad. People should know about that. And so they get the Pantages on the historic register, and a whole bunch of experts are brought in to bring this building back and to rejuvenate it. And they do so with aplomb. One of the coolest things I think about it is that you get to see the exterior here. So this is the redesign of the lobby, and you can see the Bostwick building, that Flatiron building, up in the upper left-hand corner here. And what this looks like today is really something special. So this is a refurbishment of the original lobby area. And you can see the Bostwick building. That's it right there across the street. They put the skylights back in. They did the white terracotta on the exterior. And then all of these windows out here, really just bringing the beauty of the place back to the forefront of the imagination. And I want to take you guys down below really quick so you can get to see the basement. Because again, it's 2 sub-basements down there. And I just want you to get to see it. So this happens too in 1983, that the city, now that it owns the building proper, takes over the space. So it was actually the city of Tacoma that allowed me access down here. And this is where the real ghost stuff starts to happen for me. So it's a labyrinth down here. You'll notice the yellow lines down here. It's to help you escape during a fire, because you could easily get turned around in this building and die here. So when you come down the utility stairs, we get to enter the main part of the sub-basement. And this is where people have reported seeing the ghost of Alexander. And this is key for me. People have always talked about seeing someone who bears Alexander's appearance later in life, like trial Alexander, not young, invigorated Alexander, older, beat down, sad Alexander. And that they'll just find someone, looks like they're standing in the corner down here in prop storage. And they'll be like, hey, what are you doing? And they'll go over to see what's going on. Nothing. The fact that this space is also populated by some of the most disturbing props in the area, including, let's see if we can zoom ahead to creepy gnome Santa just lingering down here. There's also a mummy that you'll get to see here in a second. Yep, you guys thought there was a jump scare coming. Gotcha. This is the utility elevator over there, as well as just a good warning to beware pickpockets and people accused of worse things. The mummy here has been a part of the building for a long period of time. I have no idea where she came from, but she's always in a different position every time I'm in the Pantages, and it freaks me out. The thing I wanted you guys to see is just around the corner here. That's the utility elevator, and that comes out on the street level on Commerce Street. So that you can bring all of this heavy equipment down inside, and then can actually be lifted out through the stage, depending on the period of history there. The ghosts on this whole thing happen down in the basement, but also up on the main level here. So after this is refurbished in the 1980s, it's brought back to that luster that it used to have. The plaster is repainted, and the theater opens again as a true cornerstone in the city of Tacoma. And what's so interesting about that is that first bust that I showed you, the plaster frieze, 2 of them sit on either side of the stage up top, and they're modeled after the face of Alexander. You can see one of them right up there. And they're said to change their expression based on the quality of the performance. But people that look like Alexander and Klondike Kate have both been spotted in these box seats, just sitting when nobody should be in them throughout the evening. Also, people have said that when they go down the aisle looking for their seat, they're like, oh, shoot, where am I? Am I in row H or I? That when they arrive at the one, they'll often be notified by it by an ice cold blast of air rushing past their ankles. And they feel that there's something in the area encouraging them to go down to that particular aisle. And so the ghost stories continue on the Pantages again and again. But I have some credible thoughts towards that here in a second. So it's brought back, right? 1983. The stained glass skylight is polished up and restored. The building is transformed from the Roxy, from the Pantages Center, into the building that we have it today. And I like to think of it as a legacy moment for Kate because it was her money. And while it was the business spirit of Alexander Pantages, it was her launching his career up in the Yukon that led to the whole Pantages circuit, all 30 of those theaters being possible. And so as you're wandering around in that section downtown, you can still see the ghost art down there, right? So these are advertisements from the same period as the Pantages, still up on the brick today, just refusing to be washed away by time and rain. And the spirit of Kate ends up, like I told you, being spread by her ashes out in the Highland Desert here. And this is a photograph that was actually taken of it because the mystery got cracked. Some investigative journalists went down and tried to figure out who this mysterious person was who ends up fulfilling her final wishes. Was it a former lover from the Yukon? Was it one of the husbands that maybe we didn't record at the time? Was it someone from the Pantages family trying to make amends? And for me, it's the most satisfying ending for it because it's a historian, an Oregon historian who worked at a local library, had been digging into the Klondike Kate story and feeling a deep sense of obligation to see her story find resolution, went down to the mausoleum where she had been killing time, I guess, and fulfilled her final wishes that he had found in her final documents that she had been preserving, and spread her ashes out there. And how do we know this? Because he took records like a good historian would. So not only did Mr. David Dunaway here fulfill the final wishes of Kate Rockwell, but he made a note of it and then had the thing notarized because that's how we do it in the Pacific Northwest. The fact that all of this happened in the Pantages and the area, and that the face of Alexander is now frozen in time, looking down forever on a legacy that was stolen away from him, is something just too good to pass up. And I think it's an opportunity for us to think that perhaps his expression doesn't just change on the quality of the performance, but on the drama that unfolds around us on a day-to-day basis. And that is the Pantages in a nutshell. This landmark theater, historically preserved, is a time capsule of human interaction and betrayal and lust and greed, sometimes so much more exhausting and treacherous than the plays that are displayed on its stage. It's some good stuff, guys, and I hope that you know a little bit more about it. This is a shameless opportunity for me to say that the theater person in me would like to thank you guys for coming out. And if you enjoyed your tour tonight, now is a wonderful opportunity to remember that so much of these virtual experiences brought to you by the generous support of viewers like you. If you have enjoyed your tour and you would like to show your appreciation, you can always leave a tip with the PayPal link on prettygrittytours.com. And we've got some good stuff going up. So I appreciate you guys coming out for another virtual experience. Next week, I know we've got a good one on Olympia, and the Meeker Mansion is going to be featured. So I'm very excited to take you guys visually and virtually through that experience. So, thanks for coming along with me. If you guys have any questions, comments, or just fun stories about your time at the Pantages or the Roxy, put them in the comments below, because we're always collecting more good stories as we move throughout time and space. But thank you. Thank you guys for joining me. Thank you for giving me something to do on this whole COVID experience. And I'm very much looking forward to welcoming you guys back out on walking tours in person, hopefully soon. Until then, though, I'm Captain Chris Stottinger. I want to encourage you guys to keep on exploring.